Why is everything so difficult? Living, breathing, walking, and thinking. I live life for the challenges. This story is the voice of everyone who has been silenced. I remained silent for years, but in the end, they had to listen to me. I kept my sorrows to myself for years. No one believed me. I know all too well what it means to be alone in this life, to have a voice, but not be able to make it heard. That is true. Silence. My name is Evelyn Grace, and I am 68 years old. I currently live in a small farmhouse with a red roof in southwestern Missouri. This house, sheltered by the shade of a walnut tree, appears peaceful from the outside, but behind its walls lies a silent story. Today, after many years, I want to break that silence. My youth was spent in a rural town in Tennessee. I grew up in a large family. My mother, Emily, was patient, and my father, Roy, was strict but reliable. I was the third of 5 siblings. I grew up around crowded tables, learning the value of a simple life at a young age. But even as I long for those days, there are some things I wish I could erase from my memory. This story is not easy to tell. It's like looking into a broken mirror. No matter how closely you look, some pieces are always missing. But I have to tell it, because some pains grow when they are not shared, and some silences destroy a person from the inside out. It was 1981. I was 25 years old. I was young, full of faith, and clinging tightly to life. I worked at a small town library and helped my mother at home in the evenings. For the first time in my life, someone touched my heart. His name was Marcus. He was the town's new doctor. He was handsome, kind-hearted, and as quiet as I was. We met a few times, then a few more. My heart beat differently when he was around. You know how a woman feels when she first starts to be loved. Insecurity gives way to hope, doubt to excitement. Our relationship deepened quickly. Marcus's warm smile had seeped into the dreams I built before going to sleep at night. My family was cautious about him, but I didn't listen, carried away by the enthusiasm of youth. I only listened to my heart. I wish everything had turned out as our hearts had said. When Marcus proposed to me, I couldn't hold back my tears. For the first time in my life, I felt so valued. Our wedding was simple but heartfelt, with a crown of wildflowers, my mother's lace dress from her youth, and vows exchanged in the small church of our town. We began to build a life together. Back then, happiness meant sharing a meal or resting our heads on the same pillow. But reality isn't as gentle as dreams. In our second year of marriage, Marcus was temporarily called to the city hospital. This was a task that would last a few months. At first, I was worried, but he reassured me. "Just 3 months, Evelyn," he said. "Then we'll build an even more beautiful life together." Those 3 months felt like a lifetime. Because Marcus returned from that city a different person. And with that return, the crack in my life began to grow silently. Marcus was different when he returned. The warmth I had once seen in his eyes had been replaced by a tired, distant gaze. His arms were still tight when he hugged me, but something was missing. Perhaps it was intention, perhaps love, perhaps it was me. At first, I attributed it to his fatigue. Working in a new city is tough, I told myself. Maybe he's been through something but is struggling to talk about it. Maybe he's trying to protect me. Yes, women always think that way. Every explanation becomes a defense. We deceive ourselves to avoid facing the truth, but that silence grew deeper over time. Marcus no longer came home at the same time, no longer told me stories like he used to. At meals, he would lower his head to his plate to avoid eye contact. At night, I was the first to go to bed, and even in my sleep, I was alone. We were only physically in the same house. Our souls had grown distant from one another. One night, I gathered my courage and asked, "Marcus, is something wrong? Are we okay?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he turned his head away. "We're fine, Evelyn. I'm just very busy. Stop thinking about everything. Stop thinking about everything." That sentence echoed in my dreams that night more than anything else. Because I was the one who was always thinking about everything. I was the one fixing every crack in the life we had built together. And now my hands were shaking. As the days passed, the changes in Marcus' behavior became more pronounced. The phones he kept hidden in his pocket, the scent of women's perfume lingering on the bathroom mirror, a scarf that wasn't mine in the laundry basket. They were all small clues. But those clues turned into a fire in a woman's heart, and the name of that fire is betrayal. I wasn't yet certain that Marcus had betrayed me, but my instincts were whispering another truth to me. Women sometimes listen not to words, but to silences. And Marcus's silence screamed betrayal. One morning, I didn't see him off to work. As he walked out the door, I watched him silently. A part of me said, "Go, but don't come back." But a stronger part of me still loved him, still wanted to hope. That day, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. I was only 27 years old. There were fine lines under my eyes and a tired smile on my lips. But inside me, there was still a strength to fight. If this marriage was going to end, it wouldn't be because I gave up, but because I didn't deserve it. From that day on, I began to observe every detail. I took notes, collected clues, quietly, like a shadow, just like the silence Marcus brought back to our home on the day he first returned. And that silence was preparing to confront me with a truth. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Some lies are heard not with the ears, but with the heart. When Marcus still said home to me, that familiar warmth was gone. His voice didn't tremble, but my heart knew very well that he was running away from his words. That week, I collected little clues. A hotel keyring in his shirt pocket, a forgotten bottle of wine in the trunk, a woman's hairpin. In Marcus's orderly, planned life, such forgetfulness was highly conspicuous. One night, while he was taking a shower, he left his phone on. My conscience fell silent. My curiosity spoke. I looked at the messages. "You were amazing last night," a woman had written. Her name was Kendra, and the message had been sent at 2:12 a.m. Lying in silence in our home, in my bed, I realized in that moment that everything was real. I had been cheated on, but this wasn't just a betrayal of marital fidelity. It was a betrayal of my dreams, my beliefs, my patience. Marcus had shattered every value I had cherished for years. The next morning at breakfast, I didn't let on. I cooked eggs, brewed tea. When he sat down at the table, I looked into his eyes. "You're quiet this morning," he said. "I'm tired," I replied. But what I was thinking was, I had imagined growing old with you, but you've ruined me. In the afternoon, I packed my bag, but it wasn't to run away. It was to find myself. While Marcus was at work, I put a few clothes in my suitcase, placed my passport in my bag, and wrote a letter. I wouldn't say goodbye with screams or tears. It would be a quiet but clear farewell. "Marcus, I had built a home with you, but I couldn't build a nest inside it. Losing me is not a forgivable mistake. You killed my love. Evelyn is gone now. Now there is only a woman who belongs to herself." As I dragged the suitcase, I looked in the mirror one last time. This time, there was no weak woman with tears in her eyes. There was a determined, upright, alone but strong Evelyn. As I went to the station, I looked out the bus window. With every street we passed, I found myself more and more. And at that moment, I achieved something I had never been able to do in the past. I stood by myself. When I woke up in Paris that first morning, the sky was gray, but for the first time, my heart felt light. As I looked out the window of my small hotel room, I felt a strange sense of calm. Marcus was no longer the center of my life. I was only me. I moved my belongings into a small apartment. It had high ceilings, parquet floors, and copies of old French paintings hanging on the walls. Every corner seemed to say, "Starting over is possible here." I was very quiet in the first few days. Paris was crowded, but I lived in the silence within me. Every morning I would get up early and walk along the Champs-Élysées. The laughter of people, the smell of coffee, the sound of French conversations, all of it reminded me that I was alive. One morning, while sitting in the park, an old woman came up to me. She had a red umbrella in her hand. "Are you alone?" she asked. I didn't understand what she said, but I smiled. "Yes," I said. At that moment, I realized being alone isn't scary. It hurts much less than being with the wrong person. As the days passed, I established my own routine. Morning walks, shopping for fresh fruit at the market, visits to bookstores. Everything felt like getting to know myself again. One day, while sitting in a small cafe behind the Louvre, I met a man named Alain. He was sitting quietly at the next table, scribbling something in his notebook. When our eyes met, he bowed his head politely. "Excuse me, do you speak English?" "Enough," I said, smiling. We talked for hours. He talked about his life, paintings, music, but he never asked about my past. It was as if he too was a man of the present, not the past. Alain never asked me about my past, and I never told him. but his silence gave me confidence. Sometimes healing begins not with talking, but with feeling someone's silence beside you. My friendship with Elaine deepened. He became the window through which I looked at life anew. We went to museums together, walked along the banks of the Seine, watched the stars at night. My heart began to heal slowly, as if shyly, but in every moment of happiness, there was a silent question echoing inside me. Where is Marcus now? Is he regretful? Or is he still telling other women, "You were wonderful"? It was right in the midst of these questions that the letter arrived in my mailbox. From Marcus: Evelyn, I can't forgive you because I have to forgive myself first. After you left, this house fell silent, but the loudest thing was your absence. I wish I could have understood the value of some things before I lost them. I folded the letter slowly and put it in my jacket pocket. At that moment, I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no longing, just closure. The words Marcus sent me were like the missing notes of emotions I had forgotten to pack in my suitcase before setting out. But I was no longer a woman in need of completion. As my days in Paris passed, the pain of the past gave way to a strange lightness. That great rupture gave me a strange sense of wholeness. It was as if, now that I knew what I didn't want, I was much clearer about what I did want. But with that awareness came a new question. Could I really love again? Elaine was still in my life, quietly, without haste, like a patient friend, someone who listened to me unconditionally, laughed occasionally, and nurtured my hopes for the future without dwelling on the past. One evening, we were walking along the banks of the Seine. The air was cool. I had my coffee in hand, and my hair was gently blowing in the wind. Evelyn, he said suddenly. I turned my head. There was a seriousness in his eyes, but it wasn't the kind that was intimidating. Do you still think you're worthy of love? That's when I swallowed. What a strange question. How true. How brave. We continued walking in silence. Sometimes, I said finally. But then when I look in the mirror, I still see unhealed parts inside me. Elaine smiled. People love broken pieces too. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from cracked vessels. That's when I realized, for the first time, someone loved me for my fragility, without having to be strong, without a mask, out in the open. But still, the voice inside me wouldn't stop. Marcus's letter was still in my pocket. His words were still swirling around in my mind. I should have explained to you, but every time I tried to speak, I was afraid, not of hurting you, but of the emptiness that would arise within me after losing you. This was the softest form of selfishness. It was an excuse for a silent departure. It was the confession of a man who was protecting his own conscience, not me. But the weight of those words no longer belonged to me. Marcus had left in one night, but I had embarked on a journey that would last years. That difference was what kept me going. There was a small bookstore in Paris that I visited every Saturday. Alongside French classics, there were also English books on the shelves. One day, while browsing the shelves, I found a book written in the style of an old woman's diary. Letters to the woman I used to be. A sentence inside it struck me. Forgiving yourself is more liberating than being forgiven by someone else. With that sentence, I realized I hadn't made peace with Evelyn yet. I didn't need to forget Marcus. I needed to forgive myself. I needed to start loving the woman who remained, not the woman he left. When I returned home that evening, I said congratulations to myself for the first time, for remaining elegant and hopeful after so much pain. Well done, Evelyn. That night, I slept without crying for the first time in a long time. But before closing my eyes, this sentence crossed my mind. I can heal without those who hurt me apologizing. Mornings in Paris are cool. As the steam from my coffee stung my nose, I found an unexpected envelope in my mailbox. It was an announcement from my American University's Alumni Association about their 10th anniversary reunion. It had been sent to all graduates, but for me it was more than just an invitation. It was like a call to confront my past. I took the envelope in my hand. I felt a tingling sensation on my fingertips. I thought of my name, the year I graduated, the heart palpitations and disappointments of those years. Jason, that is Marcus, that is, the man who started it all. I had never considered going, but then I thought, I'm not that old woman anymore. Maybe that's why I should go. Maybe sometimes you can't truly be free without facing the ghosts. My hand didn't shake as I packed my suitcase. This wasn't an escape. It was a journey of closure. When I got off the plane, the air was damp and heavy. Just like the relationship I had with Jason back then, hard to breathe but still familiar. When I arrived at the hotel, I looked out the window of my room at the city skyline. Everything was familiar, but it wasn't the same. The bagel shop on the corner, the path we used to walk together, even the library that stood like an old memory, everything was in its place. But I wasn't. The large hall where the graduation ceremony was held was like a theater stage surrounded by memories. The moment I stepped inside, my head spun. The women whispered, "Is that Evelyn? Doesn't she live in Paris? That diplomat." I just walked on. My shoulders were straight. My heart was racing but steady. My black dress was simple but elegant. My glow was not the glow of success, but the glow of having found myself. And then, I saw him. Jason was standing in the corner, holding a glass, his eyes fixed on me. When our eyes met, time stood still for a moment. There was something familiar in his eyes, guilt, and a glimmer of hope. He came over to me. "Evelyn, seeing you feels strange." "Same here," I said, but not in a bad way. His face fell. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything, Jason," I said, pronouncing his name calmly for the first time. "You owe it to yourself. You need to explain to yourself why you left, why you stayed silent, why you condemned me to wait." He fell silent. Then he bowed his head. "I was a coward. I chose the easy way out, but you were always the brave one." I smiled with a sigh. "You know, Jason, I've forgiven you. But I also know that I deserve more than the state I left you in." His eyes filled with tears. Perhaps for the first time in years, he truly saw himself. "When you said, 'I just need a little time,' that night, I was left in timelessness. But that timelessness made me who I am." I reached out my hand, and we shook hands. There was nothing romantic about it. It was a closing, quiet but honorable, like the final sentence of a chapter. He was no longer the ghost of the past. I was the author of my own story. When I returned to the hotel room that night, I looked in the mirror. There used to be a why question in my eyes, but that night, there was only thank goodness. Thank goodness I broke. Thank goodness I fell apart. Thank goodness I left. Thank goodness I rebuilt myself. That night, the loneliness in the hotel room brought me peace for the first time, not sadness. For years, I had feared loneliness because it was equivalent to being abandoned. But now, loneliness was mine. My silence was no longer a punishment, but a choice. I looked out the window. The city was slowly falling asleep, illuminated by thousands of headlights. Inside me, there was the echo of a heavy but necessary blow of closure. The next morning, I got up early. I took my coffee and went outside. I walked to the university campus. With every step I took, it felt like I was stepping on a shadow I had left behind in the past. I sat down on one of the campus benches. In my 20s, I used to sit here waiting for a message from Jason, a sign from that man who needed some time, double quotes, an apology. "I'm still here" message. But the years taught me this. Sometimes the person you're waiting for isn't you. What you're waiting for is the part of you that still clings to hope. My eyes welled up slightly, not with sadness, with gratitude for every word that had been written on that page as it closed. My return flight was in the evening. I returned to the hotel, and as I was packing my suitcase, a message popped up on my phone. "Jason, thank you for talking to me. I think I couldn't really grow up without saying goodbye to you. I'm glad you came." I didn't reply. There was no need, because the real closure was learning to hold on to the things left unanswered. When I returned to Paris, Marcus met me at the airport. His face lit up when he saw me. "Welcome back, warrior woman." I smiled. "And the woman who finally chose to return?" When we arrived home, my son ran out of his room. "Mom?" I picked him up. As his little heart beat against my chest, I realized what I had lost in the past was as much a part of me as what I had gained today. I was Evelyn, the woman who had been rebuilt, but never lost. That night, as I lay in Marcus's arms, I turned to him. "I've left the past behind me, and I thank that past, because without it, this wouldn't exist." Marcus stroked my hair, "And I wouldn't have found you." People always carry their past with them, but they decide when and how to carry it. My name is Evelyn, and I am 68 years old. My heart has been broken many times throughout my life, but none of those breaks left me unchanged. The light that shone through each crack shaped me into the woman I am today. That first week back in Paris, I felt like I was breathing again. My own pillow, my own cup, the scent of vanilla soap lingering in my son's room. This was my world now. and it was neither too much nor too little. It was just as it should be. As Marcus and I sat across from each other at dinner. He looked at me. Part of you still seems to be wandering elsewhere. It's not, I said. It's finally come back. It was just out for a walk. He smiled. Living with you is like reading a book. Every day is a new page, a new depth. Hearing that made a part of me ache. The connection I couldn't build with Jason over the years was now resonating in Marcus with just a few words. True love isn't a battlefield. It's a sanctuary. My son came to me one evening. Mom, what was America like? I paused for a moment. Then I stroked his head and replied, it was where I grew up, but this is where I live. Were you happy there? No, I said honestly, but there I learned what to do with pain. A thoughtful expression appeared on his small face. Does pain make us grow? If we take it to the right place. Yes, I held Marcus's hand one morning during a walk. You know, sometimes I feel a sense of guilt inside me. Why? Because being this peaceful feels like a betrayal of what I've endured in the past. He stopped. He took my hands in his. The pain you've experienced was the price of this peace, Evelyn. Without it, this wouldn't be yours. At that moment, tears streamed down my face, but for the first time, there was no regret in those tears, only gratitude. When I rebuilt my life, I realized happiness sprouts in the silence that follows what we've lost. And when you open your heart to that silence, it's not the past that transforms you. You transform the past. I am no longer a shadow. I am not the name of a disappointment. I am the woman who is rewriting her own story. Sometimes you can sense the past coming without the doorbell ringing. That day, as the rain quietly washed over the streets of Paris, I sat at my window drinking hot tea. Everything was as it should be. Quiet, peaceful, safe. The doorbell rang. Marcus wasn't outside, and my son was drawing in his room. As I walked to the door, I felt an uneasy stirring inside me. It was as if a familiar whisper was coming from far away. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. Jason, soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his hands in his pockets, but his eyes were still the same. That blue-green storm, that gaze that once drew me in, then left me behind. Hello, Evelyn, he said. His voice carried the weight of the years. I just wanted to see you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Words caught in my throat. Then, instinctively, I took a step back. I think you've lost your way, I said. My voice was cold, not harsh, but like a wall. No, he said. I've had a lot of time to think, and I want to apologize for everything. I didn't invite him in. He didn't insist. We just stood there at the threshold, carrying the weight of the past on our shoulders. It's been 5 years, Jason, I said. 5 years without a letter, without a response, just silence. Do you think coming here now to apologize will change anything? No, he whispered. It won't change anything. I just wanted to see you one more time. I wanted to know you're really okay. He looked at me. There was regret in his eyes, but this time, I wasn't easily swayed. I'm fine, I said. Then I spoke the words slowly but firmly. I'm better off without you. Jason bowed his head. I know. I loved you, Evelyn. But back then, I didn't know what I had. I thought to myself, you still don't know. But there was no need. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice. Goodbye, Jason, I said. As I closed the door, he looked at me one last time. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The door closed. The past receded, leaving footprints behind. That night, when Marcus came home, he didn't ask any questions. He looked at my face, read my heart. Did the storm come? He asked. It came. I said. Did it pass? It passed. And we ate our meal together. As if nothing had happened. But it had. In that moment, I understood. The real closure doesn't come from getting an explanation. Closure comes when you look into the eyes of the one who hurt you, and your heart remains silent. After that night, the streets of Paris began to feel more familiar to me. My home quieter, and my heart fuller. When Jason knocked on my door, he opened the chest of the past. But when I closed the door, I resealed that chest. This time with my own hands, forever. The next morning, Marcus sat down in the chair across from me at the breakfast table. After placing the newspaper on the table, he looked at me for a long time. Something has changed, he said. I answered without looking up from stirring my milk. Something has been completed. He just nodded. He didn't ask any more questions. That was what true partnership was like. There was no need to talk about everything. Some things were understood in silence, like a broken woman slowly filling the emptiness inside her with a full life. That day, there was an event at my son Lucian's school. It was a day when parents were the speakers. I had prepared my speech, but when I went on stage, I put the paper I was holding aside. I took a deep breath and spoke to those children with words that came from the depths of my eyes. Life doesn't always show you its beautiful side. Sometimes people leave you halfway. Sometimes even when you love with the best of intentions, you receive silence in return. But I want you to know that no one can measure your worth. There was a moment of silence in the hall, then applause. But the most precious thing was Lucian running over and hugging me. He whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." At that moment, something inside me healed. That night, Marcus and I sat on the porch before going to bed. The Eiffel Tower glowed softly before our eyes. Marcus finished his cigarette and turned to me. "This city has changed you." I shook my head. "No, this city made me who I am." We fell silent together. The silence between us felt endless. But this time, that endlessness was not an emptiness, but a peace. Sometimes you don't run away from your past. They learn to walk alongside it. Some memories hurt, but without them, you wouldn't know who you are. And Jason? He's just a shadow now, a faint stain in the corner of my life. I'm not angry, but there's no going back. One morning, after dropping Lucian off at school, I returned home. It had started to rain, a light rain caressing the windows of Paris. In the past, this sound would fill my heart with sadness. But that morning, I felt only calmness inside. I stood in front of the mirror in the kitchen. I stared at my reflection. For a long time, there, I saw a 68-year-old woman. Her hair was no longer as dark. Her face was lined with wrinkles. But her eyes, those eyes no longer dwelled on the ruins of the past, but lived in the power of the future. I saw the woman in the mirror clearly for the first time. For years, I had existed according to the eyes of others. To be beautiful in Jason's eyes, to be the perfect woman in the eyes of society, to behave according to my mother's expectations. But now, I existed only in my own eyes. That day, I realized something. I am Evelyn Monroe, not the woman Jason left behind, not a lonely mother, not the wife who once was lost. I am a woman who has reborn herself, and I smiled at the woman in the mirror. "Welcome," I said to myself, "really welcome." That day, I bought myself a flower for the first time in Paris, a pure white orchid. I named it Iris, because I was looking at life with new eyes. At dinner, Marcus turned to me. "What happened to you today?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "And everything." That's when I realized happiness isn't something that screams out loud. It's quiet, calm, but an irreplaceable presence. It settles inside you and slowly wraps around you. But life isn't that soft either. A week later, I received an email from Jason. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" My eyes studied the email for a long time. There was no regret or courage in those lines, only the arrogance of a habit testing whether it still worked. I didn't delete it, but I didn't respond either, because some silences are the loudest cries. That night, Lucian came to my room. "Mom, can I be as strong as you one day?" My eyes filled with tears. "You already are," I said. "Being strong is sometimes just about keeping on walking." I started moving like a ghost. Around the house, I learned how to make myself smaller, quieter. I'd time my tea in the kitchen for when I knew Eric was out, or when Rose was too distracted helping the kids with homework. I stopped using the living room altogether. My corner of the house shrank until it was just 4 walls, my room, and even that didn't feel like mine anymore. You know what's strange? You can live in a house, sleep under its roof, breathe in its smells, and still feel like you're trespassing. That's what it became for me. A slow exile inside the very place I once considered a safe haven. Every now and then, Eric would pass me in the hallway. "Morning, Nancy," he'd say, all sugar and salt. That same practiced grin. That practiced kindness. I hated how polite he was. Hated how he managed to make me question myself. But I wasn't confused. No, that night had burned into my memory too sharply to forget. I remembered the hush of the door, the sound of my drawer, the chill of knowing I wasn't safe even in my bed. That's not something a person forgets. And still, I said nothing more. Not to Rose. Not to anyone. Why? Because what do you do when the person you trust the most chooses not to trust you in return? I'd given birth to Rose. I'd held her when she was too small to hold herself. And now she held her husband's hand and looked at me like I was losing my mind. There's a loneliness in being doubted that no one talks about. A kind of hollowing out, a slow unraveling of your soul. I cried at night but never out loud. Even my tears had to be quiet now. Even my pain had to be polite. But something inside me, something began to shift. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was resolve. I couldn't force Rose to believe me, but I could find a way to prove the truth, even if it meant breaking the silence. I remembered something my grandson once told me. Little Boris, always so clever with electronics. Grandma, these new cameras can see everything even in the dark. He had said, waving a toy camera at me like it was a superhero tool. Back then, I laughed. But now, it felt like prophecy. The next morning, I took the bus into town. It was a slow journey, and my bones didn't appreciate the bumps. But I made it to the electronics store. I spent the last of my emergency savings on a small, motion-activated camera. It was no bigger than a matchbox and could be hidden easily in plain sight. The young man at the counter asked, "Need help setting it up, ma'am?" I just smiled and said, "No, darling. I've handled worse in my time." He chuckled, probably thinking I was a curious old lady with a weird hobby. If only he knew. That night, with shaking fingers, I set it up in my room right on my bookshelf, hidden among the spines of dusty novels I hadn't touched in years. I aimed it at my dresser, the one he always went through, the one he didn't know I was watching. And then I waited. Days passed. Nothing. Then one night at 2:07 a.m. I heard the door creak again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, but my hands were clenched beneath the blanket. The sound of the drawer sliding open, a soft rustle, and then the door closing again. I waited until morning, heart pounding the entire time. When the house emptied out, I pulled the tiny camera from its hiding place and watched the footage. There it was, clear as daylight. Eric in his pajamas, opening my drawer, digging through my things. Stealing. And no shame, no hesitation, just entitlement. I sat there, staring at the screen, numb. He had lied, over and over. And Rose, my baby, had defended him, had called me confused, had looked me in the eye and told me I was making things up. But now I had truth, cold, unblinking, undeniable. That morning, my hands trembling, I watched the video over and over again. Each time, I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't, because this was no longer just a recording. It was proof of the weight that years of silence, suppression, and denial had placed on me. The ease on Eric's face wasn't the expression of an innocent man. It was the face of a man who believed he couldn't be caught. And I had to tell Rose, this wouldn't be easy, because a mother's heart is covered with 1,000 veils to avoid seeing her child's mistakes. But I would lift those veils. That evening, we were at the dinner table. The silence was broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Eric wasn't looking at me, and Rose could barely meet my gaze. Boris was quietly sipping his soup, oblivious to what was happening. "Rose," I finally said. She lifted her head. Her eyes were tired. "What is it, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "I need to show you something." "Are we starting again?" she said, rolling her eyes. "Please, enough already." But this time, I left not just words on the table, but a camera. "Just watch." Eric's hand froze in the air. His face went from curiosity to fear to a frozen expression. Rose slowly picked up the camera. With trembling hands, she pressed the button, and in silence, the images played. Eric entering my room, rummaging through the drawers, taking my money, and leaving. After what felt like minutes, the video ended. Rose wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the screen. Her mouth was open, and all the blood seemed to have drained from her face. "This," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this real?" I looked into her eyes. "You didn't believe me, Rose. You accused me of being crazy, but this was the truth." Eric stood up angrily. "This is a mistake. It's a montage. This is nonsense. Where did you find this?" "Shut up," Rose shouted. "Shut up, Eric. How many times have you deceived me? How many times have you lied to me?" At that moment, it was as if her world had collapsed. She didn't know what to think. As for me, there was a silence after the storm inside me. He turned to me. Tears were streaming down his eyes. "Mom, I accused you. I accused you. You tell me to forgive, but I don't deserve forgiveness." I bowed my head. "I just wanted to show you the truth. Not to hurt you. Not to destroy your home. Just so you could see Rose took Boris that night and moved away from Eric. That man had packed his things by dawn, left without saying goodbye to anyone. But our story didn't end there, because even when the truth is shown, what's broken can't always be repaired. After a while, the interior of the house became a familiar yet unrecognizable place. Neither Rose's laughter echoed off the walls nor Boris's tiny footsteps could be heard. The cold shadow of Eric's lies and glances had finally left through the door, but it had left behind a completely different kind of coldness. The house was silent, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that invites deep reflection. You know, the kind of silence where you hear the sound of your own heart for the first time. And in that silence, I began to hear the things I had forgotten about myself. I was no longer sitting in my room out of fear, but out of acceptance. I was looking at myself in the mirror not as an elderly woman who had been robbed, but as a mother who had kept her silence for years and had not compromised her pride. Every wrinkle was not a regret, but a testimony. For the first time, I was able to step into the living room alone. I sat down on that chair. I hadn't sat there in years, not because Rose wouldn't let me. I just didn't want to. It was their space, and I had always chosen to stay in the background. But that day, when I sat down on that chair, it was as if even the most ordinary details of life had regained their meaning. The curtains, the window frames, the memories of children's screams, they were all there, but they no longer hurt. I poured myself a cup of tea. It was hot. As I looked out the window with the cup in my hand, I felt strong for the first time. Because I was alone, not because I had been silent, but because I had spoken. And this loneliness was a sacred loneliness. The next day, Rose called. "Mom," she said, her voice tinged with guilt and hesitation. "Yes, my dear," I said softly. "Boris misses you." "I do too. I miss you too." My heart tightened. My eyes welled up, but I held back. "Come when you believe in me," I said. "Not just because you miss me, but because you see me." There was a silence. Then a muffled "okay" came through the phone. When I hung up, that's when I realized I hadn't lost the battle. I had just won it alone. Sometimes even being right was a reason for loneliness in this life. As the days passed, the weight of that house was no longer a burden I had to carry, but rather a wreckage I had to leave behind. One morning, as I looked out the window, I felt a strange determination inside me. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "Nancy, you don't have to be trapped within the walls of this house." That day, I made up my mind. I packed my suitcase. It wasn't a hasty escape, but a quiet, dignified farewell. I didn't have many places to go, but if a woman has spent years suppressing her inner voice, she eventually comes to understand where she needs to go. I understood that day. Rather than staying in a house that wasn't mine, I had to choose freedom, even if I had nowhere to go. I left a letter for Rose. There was no bitterness in it, no resentment. I simply wrote, "My daughter, not everyone life presents to you shows you the truth. Sometimes those closest to you hurt you more than those far away. I gave you my love, not my trust. And now I know this. Love, if not covered by trust, only wounds. Perhaps one day, not when you grow up, but when you deepen, you will understand me. Until then, take care of yourself. Your mother, Nancy." I placed the key to the door on the table. There was no loneliness or regret behind me. This was my second birth. I was sitting on a bench at a small bus terminal, waiting for the bus to arrive. In my hand was a small bag containing only a few clothes, some money, and an old letter my late husband had written to me. That was all. That's how simple life was, really. The large apartment I left behind, the lavish living rooms, the expensive dinnerware, none of it weighed as heavily as a mother's silence. I boarded the bus. When it was my turn, the driver smiled and asked, "Where to, Auntie?" I paused for a moment. "I don't know yet, but there's one thing I do know now. It will be better there than here." I watched the scenery pass by the window along the way. Trees receded into the distance. Signs flashed by. People got on and off. But for the first time, I was moving forward with a sense of peace within me. Perhaps the most meaningful journey of my life was beginning after I had lost everything. The bus pulled into the terminal of a small, quiet town as the first light of dawn broke. I read the name of the town on the sign, Willow Glen. I had a strange feeling inside me. It wasn't quite peace, nor was it quite fear, but a sense of anticipation mixed with hope. I had no one with me, but for the first time I felt like I wasn't really alone. I got off, took my bag, and stepped out the terminal's exit door. The old-fashioned street lamps were still lit, and everything smelled of dew. The air was crystal clear. The sky was gray, but it seemed to hide the sun within it. At that moment, I thought, this could be the beginning. My first task was to find a small room. Across from the terminal, I saw a wooden sign, roses and weekly rooms available. The name felt like a coincidence. Maybe God was smiling at me. An elderly woman opened the door. Her name was Martha. Her eyes behind her glasses were both tired and kind. After a brief conversation, she gave me a small, sunny room in the attic. The furniture was old, the ceiling slightly slanted, but the first thing I felt when I entered the room was a sense of safety. A few days passed quietly. I would wake up early in the morning and go for a walk in the small town park. I had started knitting baby booties with the old wool I had brought with me, both to pass the time and perhaps to earn a little pocket money if I sold them. And then one morning, while I was sitting in the town park, someone appeared beside me. She was a middle-aged woman with a smiling face. Her name was Linda. "Hello," she said. "I've seen you here for a few days now. Are you a visitor? Or did you move here?" "I just came here to rest for a while," I said. "I understand you want to be alone. But you know, sometimes 2 words can change everything," she said with a smile. And that's exactly what happened. Linda volunteered at the town's women's association. They organized activities like crafts, knitting, helping the elderly, and a book club. The next day, she invited me over. At first, I hesitated, but then I told myself, "Nancy, you don't have to get used to this silence. Talking can also heal." When I stepped into that small wooden building, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: acceptance. The women welcomed me warmly. They didn't ask about my story. They simply said, "Welcome," accepting me as I was. For the first time, I felt like a part of something, not a burden. Weeks passed. Now every Tuesday morning was our craft day. We had discussions in the book club, and in the evenings, we sat quietly, eye to eye, listening to old songs. One day, Linda came up to me and said, "Nancy, you were the missing piece of our puzzle. You completed us." My eyes filled with tears. Because for the first time in years, someone had said to me, "I'm glad you came." In that small town, in that small room, with those small hands knitting socks, I was reconnecting with life, quietly, without being a burden to anyone. I was wounded, but I was alive. And most importantly, I was living for myself. The days in Willow Glen were beginning to resemble one another, but this time the similarity was comforting. Previously, quiet days felt like a form of imprisonment to me. Now, however, this silence had become the sound of healing. In the mornings, I would wake up to the scent of fresh bread coming from Martha's kitchen. I would take a walk in the park early in the day, then head to the women's club with my sewing box. There, it wasn't just threads, yarn, and needles that were being mended. My broken heart was slowly being repaired as well. One morning, Linda sat down next to me. She had her tea in her hand as usual, but there was a different expression on her face. "Nancy," she said, "do you think forgiveness is really possible?" Her question caught in my throat, because I had asked myself the same question countless times. "Forgiveness," I said. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgiving someone, but letting go of their influence over us. In other words, freeing ourselves." At that moment, I realized I wasn't free yet. I hadn't forgiven Martin. Maybe I hadn't forgiven my daughter either, but I couldn't heal by carrying that burden. Instead of waiting for them to change, I needed to let go of the weight inside me. That evening, I wrote a letter in my notebook, not to send, but to light in my heart. "Dear Natalie, perhaps you will never read these lines. Perhaps I will never hear an apology from you. But I want you to know, I still love you. On the day you silenced me, you didn't just silence my voice, you shattered my past, my memories, and my faith in you. But I loved you for a lifetime, and I no longer want to carry that love on my back. I forgive you, not because I think you will come back to me, but so that I can move on with my life." Nancy, when I put the final period, my tears fell silently onto the page of the notebook. But these tears were no longer tears of pain, but tears of purification. As the weeks passed, the townspeople embraced me more and more. I started organizing story time for the children at the library. I told the little ones with sparkling eyes old stories, sometimes knitting them socks, sometimes just sitting beside them. There was a child named Eli. He was a quiet child, but His eyes were always watching his surroundings. One day he sat down next to me and said, "Aunt Nancy, since you started living here, my mother has been smiling more." My heart warmed. Perhaps sometimes our mere presence could be a source of healing. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Martha, she turned to me and said, "Nancy, some people just pass through our town. Some stay, but very few leave a mark. You're one of those who leave a mark." The words caught in my throat. Martha had unknowingly shown me again what it felt like to be there. And so, each day in Willow Glen brought me closer not to the old Nancy, but to a stronger, more peaceful Nancy. In the years that followed, I learned that happiness is stronger than anger, peace stronger than revenge, and silence stronger than shouting. But my story wasn't over yet, because one morning, I found an unexpected envelope in the mailbox. The sender's handwriting was familiar. Natalie. I stood there for a long time with the envelope in my hand. My fingers were trembling. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. Natalie's handwriting was as familiar as the day she wrote, "Mom, I love you so much," on the edge of my notebook years ago. But it no longer evoked the same feelings. Before opening the envelope, I took a deep breath. The words waiting for me would either mend the past or tear it apart even more. 2 folded pages came out of the envelope. I opened them and began to read. "Dear Mom, I wrote and erased this letter countless times. Every word I put on paper reminded me of how late I was. But I don't know if this lateness is any less painful than not writing at all, not believing you. Silencing you, doubting you, is the greatest shame of my life. I left Martin. You need to know this. Trying to stay with him, continuing to live as a woman who had wronged her own mother, was eating me alive from the inside out. When I turned my back on you that day, I had also turned my back on myself. Mom, when I didn't listen to you and believed Martin, I was actually trying to protect not just my marriage, but my identity. When I realized he had cheated on me, it was as if everything you had said years ago echoed in my head. I understood too late, but I finally understood. Your grandson Boris has grown up now. He wants to write you a letter. He keeps saying how much he misses you. We want to come to Willow Glen with him, if you still want to see us. I love you, Mom, despite everything." Nathalie, as I held the letter in my hands, my tears seeped into the pages. That sentence, "I left Martin," was not just an admission of a past mistake, but also a glimmer of hope that the chasm within me was beginning to close. But a part of me remained cautious. In the heart of a mother who had been silenced, humiliated, and ignored for years, there was not only love, but also hurt. And this letter, yes, it was sincere, but could it make up for the past? I didn't know. That night, the sky was filled with stars. Martha was beside me on the porch. "They're coming," I said quietly. "Natalie and Boris. Are you ready to welcome them?" Martha asked. After a long silence, I replied, "I'm not ready, but I want to stop waiting." Sometimes a person isn't ready to forgive. They just want to move on because they're tired of not forgiving. The next morning, Martha and I tidied up the living room. I washed the old lace curtains and folded the blanket I had knitted for my granddaughter but never gave her. Every corner of the house seemed to shout that this place, which once felt foreign to me, was now mine. As the clock approached 3 in the afternoon, I checked the mailbox again. It was empty. This time I wasn't expecting anything else, but my heart hadn't yet recovered from the weight of the letter that had arrived. 2 days later, while waiting for them at the small bus stop in Willow Glen, my heart was still in turmoil. My hands were clenched in my bag. My eyes were on the road. Then a familiar face appeared. Boris. He was a young man now. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at me as a child was still there. His smile resembled his mother's, but it was calmer, more peaceful. He ran over and hugged me tightly. Natalie approached slowly behind him. When we faced each other, we couldn't say anything for a moment. So much had happened that words seemed meaningless. Before she could speak, I took a step forward and embraced her. Though it didn't completely erase the weight of the past, that embrace shifted something. That evening, we sat down to dinner together. After years, for the first time, we felt like a family at the table. Stories were told. Silences were accompanied by tears. Boris laughed. Natalie was silent, and I slowly lowered the walls inside me. The letter didn't fix everything, but it opened a door, and this time, I decided to walk through that door quietly. That night, The conversations at the table where we sat together were like voices echoing in a house that had been silent for a long time. We were not a family that had grown apart, but a bond reborn from the silence. But that bond was still fragile, still full of cracks. I understood when Natalie gave me a shy glance from afar. We couldn't erase the weight of all those years in a single day. And in truth, there was nothing to erase. It needed to be remembered, because some pains heal not when they are covered up, but when they are accepted. The next morning, while Boris played with his toy train on the porch, Natalie sat down beside me. Her hands were clasped on her knees. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, but her voice was low and clear. Mom, I wronged you. I know that, but I don't deserve to have a strong woman like you still here, still sitting upright. Behind her words lay years of regret. I couldn't give her the answer she was expecting right away. A mother can feel both pain and mercy at the same time. Do you know what hurt me the most? I said. At that moment, our eyes met. It wasn't Martin. I wasn't broken when I saw him in my room that night. What really broke me was when you looked into my eyes and said, "You're imagining things, Mom." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. She bowed her head. "I'm not blaming you," I added. "You were scared. You didn't want to believe it. You were trying to protect your own life." But I was left alone that day. Silence fell. Silence can sometimes be a reckoning, sometimes a sign of forgiveness. This time it was the latter. That night, when I saw Martin's shadow in my room, I said, I had to fight not only a thief but also my own mind. Because when no one believes you, you start to doubt yourself. That's the worst kind of loneliness. Natalie's lips trembled. Mom, not believing you that night didn't mean I didn't love you madly, but I was so caught up in everything. I couldn't accept that my marriage had fallen apart. I nodded. I know. And I don't want to blame you anymore. Because you being here, writing that letter, it means so much more than anything else. I thought I'd lost you, she said quietly. But what I really lost was myself. I thought I'd never be able to look into your eyes again. You're looking now, I said with a smile. And in that moment, we smiled through our tears. Both of us allowed a wound that had been ignored for years to breathe for the first time. That day, while walking with Boris in the park, he took my hand. Grandma, he said, can I tell you a secret? Of course, sweetheart. My mom used to say she missed you every night. She'd look at your picture before going to sleep. Something inside me melted. A knot loosened. Natalie might not have been able to put it into words, but her love had resonated in that little boy's heart. That evening, I brought out my old photo album. Natalie and I looked at each photo one by one, her first birthday dancing with her father, the flowers I held at her university graduation, a photo of her as a baby in my arms. That woman, that was her, I said, pointing to a photo. Not that old woman who claims she's hallucinating. Natalie wiped away her tears and whispered, no, that woman is still you. And in that moment, I knew. Another page hadn't closed, but a page had been turned. Some wounds, even when they have scabbed over, still bleed when scratched. What was between Natalie and me was such a wound. That evening, as we sat on the porch, even our silence had begun to understand each other. Inside me was still a broken mother. Inside her was the echo of the losses she had suffered as both a child and a woman. Mom, she said, I want to tell you something, but I don't know how to start with words. Just start, I said. I'll hear the rest. Natalie took a deep breath, as if she were revealing a secret for the first time since childhood. I was deeply in love with Martin, she said, but that love eventually made me forget who I was. Do you remember how kind and gentlemanly he was when he first came to you? I nodded. Those fake smiles, those mom-s, they all flashed before my eyes. At first, it was really good. Then he started controlling me. He interfered with what I wore. He monitored my phone calls. He didn't want me to see my friends. He did all this in the name of love, and I thought it was love. Her voice cracked. In that moment, I saw the shattered dream of her youth. In her eyes, Martin hadn't just taken my money. He'd stolen my daughter's identity. Why? I asked. Why did you stay silent? Because, Mom, she said, crying, I couldn't be as strong as you. I was married. I was a woman with children. I didn't want to fail. I couldn't be as selfless as you. I just tried not to break. I held her hand. Her fingers were trembling. Being strong doesn't mean never breaking. Sometimes you survive by breaking apart, I said. You're alive, my daughter. And that's enough. After that night, Everything began to move slower but more steadily. Natalie started to see me as her mother again, and I began to love her again, like a little girl. But the past wasn't easy to forgive. One evening while Martin was dealing with paperwork, Boris ran into my room. "Grandma, my dad left his laptop open. The photo you thought was in your box is also on it, and it was in an encrypted folder. Something inside me froze. The photo? The photo I thought was in my box? That was my most private place. Martin was still watching us. He hadn't left. He was just being more careful. The next day, we secretly checked the laptop. The truth was clear enough to break my heart. Martin had been watching my room with a hidden camera for years. Every night, every day. When the lid of my trunk was opened, when the money decreased, everything was recorded, and I saw that these images had been meticulously organized into a folder. This is sick, Natalie shouted. I wasn't crying, because I wasn't afraid anymore. I just knew. I was right. And finally, someone else knew too. I'll protect you with those images, I said. But this time I won't stay silent. I was left in the shadows for so many years. I won't stay in the shadows anymore. A mother's greatest strength lies in her silence. But sometimes, that silence must speak. My name is Nancy. I am 68 years old, and at the end of this story, I am no longer a lonely woman. And no longer an abandoned mother. And no longer a ghost. Today, I am standing up for myself. The recordings we found on Martin's computer were evidence that shattered years of silence. Natalie's face had gone pale. When my grandson Boris pointed to the camera's date with his tiny hands, none of us could speak. For years, he's been watching you, my daughter said in a hushed voice. How could I have been so blind? I touched her shoulder. Betrayal is not only the sin of the one who commits it, but also of the one who protects it, my daughter. But every heart that opens its eyes deserves forgiveness. It was no longer time for talk, but for action. Natalie took the phone with a determined expression. She wanted to confront Martin before going to the police. She wanted to look into those empty, sly eyes and scream the weight of the years at him. That night, when Martin came home from work, there was a silence in the house. The plate and fork were set. Everything seemed like a daily routine. But that dinner was the beginning of the end. When he sat down at the table, Natalie placed the computer in front of him. She opened the recordings. She didn't speak. She just let him watch. Martin's face paled. He shifted uneasily. His eyes were wide with horror. There was nowhere left to run. What is this nonsense? He whispered. You can't do this to me. You did this to me, Martin. Natalie shouted. You watched my mother for years. You stripped her and humiliated her. And I defended you. I left that woman alone. Martin stood up. Boris clung to me in fear. I stood up too. This time I wasn't trembling. This time my hands were strong. I gave you food. I gave you a home. I gave you my daughter. But you won't take my soul. Because I'm alive, Martin. And I won't stay silent anymore. Natalie called the police. Martin was arrested. The dark atmosphere in the house began to dissipate for the first time in days. But the wound left inside us wasn't the kind that would heal easily. Months passed. The case was filed. The footage was accepted as evidence. Martin was tried. He received a prison sentence. That day in court, I clasped my hands together and bowed my head before the judge. No, it wasn't a feeling of victory. It was a prayer of I am finally at peace. Natalie started therapy. Boris did an art project at school titled My Hero is My Grandmother. Our home was rebuilt, but that old trunk still sits in the corner of my room. Perhaps there is no gold inside anymore. But the weight of the years still echoes within me, even when the trunk's lid is closed. I am Nancy. Today, I am writing the final lines of my own story. It may be a tragedy, but it is also an awakening. It is proof that we can rise again at any age, in any place, and after any pain. For every mother who trusts her child, but pays the price for that trust. For every woman who thinks she is alone but is actually the very embodiment of courage. I was silent, then I spoke, and now I am silent. In peace.